Okay. Again, welcome. We're going to be talking about the Neurodevelopmental Profile Wheel, and this is about understanding and supporting neurodivergent children, trying to get to the internal experience, trying to figure out what it is that they're experiencing so that we can better support them. I'm Carrie Watts. I'm a family support worker with Thriving Families. Laurie?
I'm Laurie Morrison. I'm an educational psychologist, so I cover schools up in Caithness and Sutherland, but also part of the Pines training team.
And Laurie developed this profile wheel a while ago, and we're actually in the process of evaluating it. So if you have feedback afterwards, we would also appreciate your insights on that after we've gone through it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So just to get started, we want to go over some of the terminology that is sometimes confusing for people when we're talking about this area. So neurodevelopment is a term that refers to the brain's development of its processing, of its systems and its networks, which influences an individual's information processing. So basically how you're taking your information in, how it's getting processed, and how it's allowing information to go back out. So this includes your ability to learn, to read, your social understanding, memory, all of that stuff. So you can see it's quite a lot. A neurotype is a person's unique way of thinking. So there are several different neurotypes, and they're all equal. They're just different. So this is determined, your neurotype is determined by the way your brain is wired, basically the way it's developed. There's often confusion about the difference between neurodivergent and neurodiversity. And in order to understand those, we first need to understand neurotypical. So of the neurotypes, the predominant neurotype, or what is known as neuronormative, is a neurotypical person. So this is the way that culture and society expects a person's brain to behave. And so society is set up around the needs of neurotypical people. The way that they have the lights in the stores and the music that they're playing and all of the marketing things, all those things are set up for a neurotypical brain. A neurodivergent brain is any neurotype that is not the neurotypical. So there are many different kinds of neurodivergent. One of those is autism, being autistic. One of those is ADHD. Being dyslexic is being neurodivergent. So any way that your brain can be not typical means that you're neurodivergent. This is not the same as neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is when there's a group of people with mixed neurotypes. So Laurie and me and all of you here today, we create a neurodiverse group because we will all have differing neurotypes. Because I am neurodivergent, I am separate from the neurotypical, but we're all part of neurodiversity. So I hope that makes sense. There's also understanding that neurodivergent people can be multiply neurodivergent. So if you're autistic and ADHD and dyslexic, those are all different neurodivergences. And this is my favorite explanation of it. Imagine it like cupcakes. Okay, so vanilla cupcakes are neurotypical. All other cupcakes, all other flavors are neurodivergent. And when we mix all of the cupcakes together, we have neurodiversity. And I'm using artwork from NeuroWild because I love her and she is the best at everything. If you don't follow NeuroWild on Facebook, follow NeuroWild. Okay, so neurodiversity here is there's a group of neurodiverse. It has more than one type of brain. On the other side, even though those are all autistic cupcakes, it is not neurodiverse because it's one neurotype. Okay, so moving on, now that we've done that, let's move on to the wheel itself. So the wheel shows 6 areas of neurodevelopment. So as we know, neurodevelopment is about how our brain is wired, how it all gets put together and how it allows us to process information. So when we're looking at a neurodevelopmental profile, we're looking at those 6 areas of development. And these are the same areas that are assessed in an NDAS assessment. So there's the cognitive, communication, social, sensory, motor, and emotional. You'll see that at the center of that is the My World Triangle. And many of you will be familiar with the My World Triangle from child's plans. We're supposed to organize a child's plan around the My World Triangle so that it isn't just about a child's experience at school. It's at school, at home, and in their wider world. So the center of this wheel is the My World Triangle, because really that's what we're trying to get at, is what is this child's experience all around with their neurodevelopmental needs. And this is used to measure strengths and challenges in all parts of life. And so it's important that when we're capturing things on the neurodevelopmental wheel, that we are capturing both strengths and challenges.
Is that going to knock off your plans for today?
Whoever's just joined, I think your microphone is on. If you could mute that, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. So another important part of this is that children and young people and their families must be included in these discussions. So this isn't something that we do away from a child and then say, this is what we've decided about you. The family and the child need to be included in that. So who should use it? The members of a caring circle for a child and young person. So that's everybody who's involved in that young person's life in supporting them. So carers, families, educators, other professionals should be working together to ensure that everyone is aligned in their understanding of and their approach to providing support for that young person. And what we should be capturing is what we can observe of the external experience, so we can then try to understand what that internal experience might be that is driving that external behavior. So when we're working outside of it, first we have to say, yes, this is what I can see happens when we walk into Tesco and it's really, really bright and loud. I can see that my young person kind of shuts down. Then we want to take that and say, what could be driving that? And Laurie, over to you.
Have you moved the slide on?
I did.
Oh,
Can you not see it?
we're still on the one with the wheel that says Neurodevelopmental Profile Wheel at the top of it. Or is it
How about
changed for other? Now, there we go. Perfect. So when we were developing the neurodevelopmental profile, so in terms of what Carrie was saying there around that, we've got all these neurotypes and we've got lots of overlaps between different neurotypes, and children might have multiple different diagnoses. What we wanted was to create a tool that actually we could use regardless of the specific diagnosis that a child might have. Partly because lots of our children are waiting for a diagnosis, lots of them have got multiple diagnoses. Some of them might never meet the criteria for a diagnosis, but it doesn't mean that they haven't got challenges across some of these areas. So what we wanted to do is to try and find a way that we could profile the needs of a child that weren't dependent on the kind of diagnostic criteria or them having that specific label. So we felt that the best way of doing that was to look at different areas of development. So there was a lot of discussion around how we would go about doing that, but we landed on these 6 areas of development, which we feel capture most of the things that we would be thinking about in terms of a child's development. So I'll run through those really quickly, but if you want more information about any of those areas of development, there is a video for each of these areas of development. So because we're short on time today, we won't be going into a huge amount of depth about them, but there's lots of resources there for you to go and explore these in more depth. And I would absolutely recommend that you do that before you complete a profile for a child if you're not familiar with these areas already. So the 6 areas that we've landed on were emotional development. So thinking about how we understand our own emotions, but also how we recognize those emotions in other people, which allows us to be able to manage our own emotions in a safe way, but also it helps with those interactions with other people so that we can ensure that we're not doing things that might upset other people, or that we understand someone else's experience. We thought about motor development, which is the specific coordination and control skills used in managing everyday tasks. So we're thinking about our gross motor skills, so our kind of big movement skills, but also thinking about our fine motor control and our ability to do tasks that require kind of those fiddly things like buttons and doing writing and those sorts of things. Cognitive development is a huge one, and it does capture all of that kind of higher order thinking. So it captures things like memory, our ability to think and plan and reason, and to organize ourselves. In terms of the video, we focused in on executive function skills, which would be your inhibitory control, your ability to kind of switch attention, and working memory and kind of mental flexibility. So we've kind of drilled down to a specific area because cognitive is so huge, but there are lots of things that we might want to think about in terms of that. Sensory development, we're thinking about our experiences and processing of sensory information from all of our senses. So we're all familiar with the 5 senses. I won't run through them because I always find that difficult to remember them all off the top of my head. Even though they're written on the slide, I will probably find that tricky. But we also want to think about the additional senses of balance. So we think about our vestibular system and how we kind of keep ourselves balanced. Our internal sensations, so we talk about interoception, which is our sense of that kind of internal experience, so that we know when we're hungry or we need to go to the toilet and these sorts of things. And that's also related to our emotional experiences because we often feel that internally as well. We've thought about your sense of kind of body and space. So we talk about proprioception. That's one that I feel comes up a lot. So how we know where our body parts are in relation to each other, but also where we are in relation to other people and things. So that's one that comes up quite frequently. We also thought that social development was really important. So that's our understanding and application of rules of social interactions in different settings. It also ties in with that emotional literacy that we were talking about earlier on, being able to recognise how someone else is feeling and just generally how we relate to other people. So how we interact with other people more generally. And then we've got communication, which is specifically to do with the understanding and responses to verbal and non-verbal messages being passed between yourself and others. So thinking about their language skills, but also how do they read a situation? Can they get the nuances of language? And thinking about things like whether we're using literal language or things like metaphors and their ability to understand that. So like we say, that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of the 6 areas of development. If you go to the Pines website page for the neurodevelopmental profile, there is a video for each, which dives into that in a little bit more depth. So what we wanted to do was to actually run you through the neurodevelopmental profile. So we're going to show you a kind of blank profile, the one that you would find on the website. I think what I'm actually going to do, Carrie, is if you come out of that, I'll just go into a profile so that we can kind of see that as fully as possible, because it can be a bit tricky. Bear with me, everybody. Right, can everyone see that? Goodness me, I've lost you guys. Can you see what I'm sharing on the screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, perfect. Just pipe up if anyone's not able to see it. So when you go on to Pine's website and you go into the neurodevelopmental profile wheel, there is the videos for the 6 areas of development plus an introductory video, and at the bottom there is a link which you can click on to get this profile. We have developed the profile as a tool that anybody can use. So it is not part of the diagnostic process specifically. That's not what it was developed for. It's really about helping anyone that's working around a child to have a better understanding of what might be going on for that child, and to help do a little bit of that kind of drilling down to work out what we need to do differently that might support the child better. So All we want at the top of the neurodevelopmental profile is the kind of basic information. So the child's name, date of birth. It's really helpful to have the date of completion and who it's being completed by. And as Carrie said, it's really, really helpful if you can have as many people from the caring circle involved in completing the profile as possible. Because what we know is that children can respond differently to different people, they can present very differently in different settings, and it's really helpful to pool all of that information together. Sometimes we might find that something works really well in one setting, and it can be good to share that information. And ideally for a child, we want everyone to have the same understanding of their needs. So it's really important that we can get as many people involved in the process as possible. And it's useful to record who's been involved, so that we know where the information's coming from when we're trying to unpick things a bit. So the next section there is kind of background information, and this is really important. So this for me is like just your key events in the child's life, key pieces of information that might have an impact on how that child develops. Because when we look at what we're seeing and we start to do that drilling down, it's really important that we know what those early experiences are, because they can have an influence on how the child has developed certain skills, or certain abilities. So it's really important that we capture things. So we'll capture things like whether they've had assessments by professionals or whether they've maybe got a diagnosis already, because we can use this for children who have already been diagnosed, just to help us to think about how we plan support around them. It's also really important to think about any other significant events that might have happened within the family. So not specifically to the child, but actually the wider family. So if we've had any significant bereavements in the family, or if there's been parental mental health difficulties or substance misuse, all of these sorts of things will likely have an impact on terms of how the child develops. So it can be really important that we capture that information within the profile wheel, because it's the lens that we're going to see all of the other information through. That can be a tricky one. Some of the information that we might need to gather, it can be quite sensitive. We might not have all the information about the early childhood experiences, but if we know about things, it's good to capture them on here. And I think that we were talking earlier on about the child's plan and actually how this relates to a child's plan. Often we've got a chronology within a child's plan, and a lot of this information can be pulled across from the chronology that's in the child's plan anyway. There might be other significant events that are not within there, but it's worth having a look through the chronology of a child's plan to pull pieces of information across that we think might be relevant to the child's development. So once we've got that kind of key background information, the next bit is looking at the presentation. So what do we see? And I would say that when I look at child's plans, often that is the information that we've got within the strengths and pressures is often that level. It's the what are we seeing? What are the behaviours that we're concerned about? What are the struggles that we think that they might have? We also like to think about what they're good at, and thinking about the sorts of strategies that seem to work for them. So we quite often are really good at capturing that kind of information. So that can be a really good starting point for when we're beginning to complete the presentation part of this. It might be that we've already got some information that we want to jot down here, but it's kind of just like a bit of a brain dump. Anything that you think might be relevant for that child in terms of thinking about how we might support them, we want to just try and capture that. So it's a bit like a pen portrait of the child. What are the key things that we think people would need to know? What are the things they're struggling with? What are the things that they're good at? What are the things that are important in their life? And we capture that in that presentation section. And that's often that kind of, it is that kind of surface level. These are the bits of information that are the starting point for us to be able to do a bit more of the kind of analysis, to work out what might actually be going on, and thinking about those internal experiences that Carrie spoke about earlier on. So once we've kind of captured the presentation information, if you are new to doing the neurodevelopmental profile, and you're not familiar with the 6 areas of development, what I would suggest is that when you move on to do the profile section, you watch each video for each area of development, and as you're watching the video, you jot down anything that you might think is relevant for that particular child that you're working with, or if it's your own child that you're completing this for. So anything that you think is relevant whilst you're watching the video, and that'll give you, it just gives you a bit more of that depth in terms of what sorts of things we're thinking about in terms of communication, what can impact on their language development and all of these sorts of things. For example, And there's question prompts there which link in with the videos as well. So you might want to have a look at the prompt questions that are there. You can also then go back and look at your presentation section and go through that with the lens of the video that you've just watched. So thinking about, I've just heard all about communication, I've got this information. Is there anything within that presentation section that might be to do with communication? And at this stage, actually, quite often, it's a bit like we're forming hypotheses. So we're thinking it might be about that. So if they're not getting ready in the morning, that might be because they're not understanding what you're saying or they're not retaining the instructions. So that might be about communication. So we would jot that down in the communication section. So you want to go watch the video, jot your notes down, have a look at those prompt questions and go back to your presentation information and just pull out anything that you think might be relevant to each of the different areas of development. And you'll see as I go down here, there are prompt questions for every area of development, and those link in with the videos. So they should make sense if you've watched the video because they're referring back to the content of the videos. So just jot down anything that you think might be relevant, and it might be that you want to jot down any differences in what you're seeing in the child in two different settings. That can be really, really helpful. So if you go down the route of doing an NDAS referral, their form actually looks very specifically for information from home and from school. And we would want you to kind of do the same thing. So if we see differences in how the child presents across any of these areas, make sure that you note those differences because that can give us some clues as to what's going on for the child. So we're starting to build a picture by going through these 6 areas of development. And often what you find is you'll realise that certain behaviours that you maybe didn't think of as being connected might start to kind of cluster. So a good example is I often find that when we get to the cognitive development part of things and we start to think about mental flexibility and that kind of rigidity and children kind of finding it difficult to kind of switch from one thing to another, that we realise that lots of the things that we're seeing might actually all be about that kind of sense of rigidity and not being able to kind of switch. So being really rigid about routines, struggling with change, struggling with transitions between activities. And we realise that they're all kind of about the same thing. So it might be that you start to see patterns forming across the different areas of development, and that'll give you some ideas of what might be going on for that child. And from there, you might start to see, maybe 2 or 3 things that you think, these are really important for my child. And that takes you on to the kind of plan section of the tool where we would want to start thinking about what can we do to support the child. Now, what you might find is you get to the end of the profile section and actually what you've got is lots of questions. And that's okay. That's quite normal. When we're going through the profile, especially the first time that you do it, you might have lots of questions, and it might be that some of the things within your plan are actually about exploring those further. So the way that we've set out the plan section, we think it's really important that we actually capture what's already happening. So often when we come to do this, there's lots of things that parents have done. They've made adaptations at home, the way that they run their household, they've done changes to meet the needs of their child. So you might not think about them consciously, but they will be there, and there's always something that we can kind of pick up on. I was in a meeting just the other week, and when I asked the question about what they were doing at home to adapt, they didn't think they were doing anything, but by the time we got to the end of the meeting, actually there was lots and lots of things that were happening that they'd just kind of done and they were working. We really want to capture that because actually often our solutions come from what's already working. So if something works in one context, or if there's a tool that's working for the child, we might want to think, well, what's that about? Why is that working? And how can we apply that in other settings or to other situations? So it's really important that we capture that. Also important that we capture, if you've tried a strategy and it hasn't worked, that might also give us clues as to what's going on. So we might think it's about one thing, we put in a strategy to help with that, and then we go, oh no, that strategy didn't work. Is that because actually it wasn't what we thought it was, it's something else? So all of these bits of information are really, really important. The next thing that you want to do is having gone through your profile and maybe pulled out 2 or 3 things that you think are really important to address, is to start brainstorming things that you could potentially do to support the child with that area. And it might be, if you find that you've got quite a few things that maybe come from the communication section or that are within the cognitive section, for example, you might want to go back to the videos and look at the end of the video. For every single area of development, we've got some strategies listed, things that you might want to try. So that can be a good starting point for thinking about what to do next. Go back to the videos and see if there's anything on there that you think might help with your child. And usually there will be more information on the Pines website to support those things. So if we're suggesting visual timelines, for example, there's videos and content to support with that. So often you can go to the Pines website to get started with these things. So I would suggest that when you're thinking about supports for the child, you think about it in terms of the interactions. So what can we do in terms of how we communicate things with the child? How can we make it easier for them to communicate with us? Thinking about the activities that we're asking them to do. What is it we're asking them to do? Can we make adaptations, make that easier for them, make it easier for them to understand what's expected? And thinking about the environment as well. So it might be that we need to make some changes within the environment to make that feel more manageable for them. And the other thing that we want to think about is there anything we can do to upskill the child? Because for some children, they might be having a difficulty with a specific area, but a little bit of intervention might bring their development on a little bit. So thinking about where we focus our efforts. And I often talk about a kind of multi-pronged approach. So we don't want to just put the focus on the child changing or them having to find a skill. We have to kind of meet their needs and kind of meet them in the middle somewhere. We upskill them a little bit, but also we make those adaptations to make things feel more manageable for them. Once you've thought about what the people within that meeting, so whoever's completing the profile, and you might end up starting off doing this by yourself. Ideally, we would want you to be doing it with others that are working around the child. You would think about what the people there can do. You would then maybe want to think about, is there anyone else involved with the child that could do something to support? So if you were completing this by yourself, you might then be thinking, well, actually, I wonder if school could do that thing. I wonder if that would help? And thinking about what other people might be able to potentially do to support the child. And then the final box there is really just to encourage you to think about who are the people that can help you with this. Because this is really tough, for parents and professionals. Often, even if we've worked out what we think the difficulty might be, and we might have an idea of a strategy, we might just need someone there to talk us through that strategy or to share resources or to help us to kind of actually put that in place, because it's not always easy. And I think as professionals, we're very good at throwing ideas into the mix, but actually you might need somebody to help you with it. So we want to kind of think about that when we're completing the profile. I'm going to pause just for a second. Does anyone have any questions at this point about the profile before we kind of move on to using an example?
I still have that other slide about what else to know, if you want me to put that up too.
Yes, that would be helpful. So if I stop sharing. Any questions? Does that all make sense? You probably won't know what your questions are until you go and actually try to do this. And it can be, I think for folk who are new to it, you will find that watching the video and doing it that way can be really helpful. I probably do it in a slightly different way, in that I would go through the presentation information, and as I'm going through it, I would be going, oh, I think that's about communication. Oh, that could be about cognitive. And so there are different ways of going through it, but I guess, ultimately it's about taking that presentation information and making sense of it in terms of those different areas of development. And as Carrie says, there are further sessions coming, so it's probably worth, if you haven't done one before, have a bash at it. And then if you've got questions, you can bring those back to the sessions that we've got in future. So other things to think about when you're doing the profile wheel. This is about us getting closer to understanding the internal experiences of a child or young person whose needs are not being met by the typical support strategies that we might have in place. So often we find in schools, the things that are in place within a classroom, or some of the, we have amazing class teachers who do all sorts of things in school without even really, we don't again, we have to get them to think about what it is that they're doing differently to meet these needs. I guess it's when we get to that point where all of the usual things that we would try are not working. And I think for you know, for parents, you might have other children or experience of other, you know, other family members having children, and all of the strategies that they're using to try and manage their children and support them are just not working for your child. And it might be that we need to kind of think a little bit differently about them and look for different types of strategies. So this is really just about us kind of starting that process. The profile will only be as good as the information that is put into it. So it's really, really worth taking the time to do this really well. Don't rush through it. I know that that can be really difficult, especially if you're at a stage where things are feeling really difficult, you're really struggling, or maybe they're really struggling in school. We want to rush to solutions. We want to kind of have a plan and know what we're going to do. But the plan will only be as good as the information that we put into the tool. So we need to make sure that we gather the information and really take time to scrutinise that and try to make sense of it before we rush to kind of coming up with strategies. So take the time that it requires. And also, again, I'm just going to reiterate, the more people that are involved with it, that know the child well, the better. So the other thing to be really, really aware of is this is not a one-off. It's not just something that you can do. You're not going to do the profile and have all the answers and then everything's going to be great. You're likely to have to answer more questions after you've done this, to come back and revisit it. Often when I do the profiles with schools or with families, often all together, I'll come in having jotted down some thoughts, and I've definitely often got lots of questions. It might be as you go through it, you can answer some of those questions by kind of probing, how do they do this in this setting? How are they coping with that? I wonder what that's all about. But often we come to the end of it and it's like we need to explore that a little bit further. We think they might be having a difficulty about this. How can we explore that further? How can we look into that to see if there's anything else we could be doing? I think ideally we want everybody to be really open to the new information that's coming in. School and home might be seeing very, very different pictures, and we all have to be really open to exploring why that is and thinking about that new information that's coming in, and trying to come to a shared understanding of what's happening for that child, because I think sometimes that's where we do come unstuck. We're all understanding the child's needs in slightly different ways, and then it's really difficult to get a consensus about how to take things forward. So the hope is that this process will help you to come to that shared understanding. And then the other thing is that it is an iterative process. So it will, you know, you might think you know what's going on, we make a plan, we put some strategies in place, and then we go, oh, this is not working. That wasn't the right thing. That's obviously not what the issue is, or it's not the right strategy. We need to try something different. So we need to be open to kind of coming back and revisiting this, and refreshing the profile, to take account of the new information that we get. So I'm conscious somebody asked a question there. Okay. Which professional should take lead on the wheel? So there's no straight answer to that. In terms of who should take the lead, there's no hard and fast rule about this. I think that we have professionals who are very confident about using these and that will happily support a family to complete it, but not all of our professionals are. And I guess part of the point of us doing these sessions is, I know that we've got professionals and parents here in these sessions. Ideally, you want it to be a cooperative process, that you're all kind of in it together. Carrie, I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I'm aware I quite often lead these, and the hope is that by those of us that feel really confident about it leading it, that other professionals will feel more confident to be able to take it forward. Like I say, I do think that actually you're going to learn from having a bash at it and just, trying to pull it together. Carrie, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the person to lead should probably be more in a facilitating capacity than in a providing information capacity. And so
Yeah.
if you've got a team of people who know that young person, I think they said they're an early years practitioner, so
Practitioner,
it
yeah.
probably in a nursery setting, um, maybe the head teacher who doesn't know the child as in a day-to-day capacity as well in a day-to-day capacity as the early years practitioner will, have the family and the staff, the schools, the people who are working with that young person, and then the head teacher kind of leading through it, if that's a possibility. It also depends on how big the school is. I mean, if you have an ASN teacher who's there regularly, they might be the person to lead it because they might have an idea on the strategies, but they won't necessarily be working directly with that young person. I think that the difficulty comes in when people go in thinking they already have the solutions,
Yeah.
because of their picture of that young person, in that one capacity that they know them. And so they think, well, this is what we need to do. And if that's the person who's then leading the discussion, it could end up getting um, sidetracked. And it's
Yeah.
better to leave it open so that everybody is throwing their information into the pot and then trying to say, okay, so what is kind of like the commonality here? What can we figure out might
Yeah.
answer all of these things? Like what might help here, what might help here. But that's personally
Yeah, I
my
think
perspective.
that's a really good point, that if people going into it open-minded and allowing yourself to go through that process of doing the profile part really fully
Mhm.
before you start thinking about the solution, so that you're all coming at that. Because often I think that you're more likely to come up with strategies and solutions that are appropriate, that everyone agrees with, if you've gone through that process together to try and understand the child or young person in the same way. Um, so there was another question there around this being used to create a robust child's plan. So one of the things that I'm really aware of is, I know that in our schools it feels like an extra pressure sometimes to create one of these, and I think that for me, I definitely feel like if I have a child's plan for the child, a lot of the information from that can actually be used for the chronology and the presentation information. If I'm supporting with doing this, I'll quite often do some of that groundwork first, so pull in some bits of information over, and then we just add in information. I think that what this does that we maybe don't get from the child's plan is that diving deeper into what does it all mean. So often the profile will actually be an action from a child's plan, but it could potentially work the other way. There was something there around the child's plans outside of the neurodevelopmental assessment referral. So I suppose that's the other thing that we're really aware of, is we know that there's a huge pressure on the NDAS service. Children have needs that we have to meet now. We can't wait for them to go through that process, or we might not want to go through that process. We have lots of families who are not interested in going down a diagnostic route, and that's absolutely fine. This is a tool that you can use to meet the needs of any child. And I'm aware as well, I work with some children who maybe it's not necessarily a neurodevelopmental condition that we're talking about. It's actually might just be about early childhood experiences or them having experienced trauma. This tool can still be helpful with that, because those things have impact on their development. So it's a tool that can be used in so many different ways. My understanding is at the moment you can use the information from this as part of an NDAS referral, but this is not their formal referral tool. So I guess it's just worth noting that as well. I'm just trying to
I
see if
think
there's
you would
any
be
other
adding
questions.
it. I think you would be including it like the way you do the child's plan along, like, so any of the supporting documentation that you would have for the supports that have been put in place for this child, trying to
Yeah,
understand that child's needs, you would be putting that in addition to the NDOS form. I do
yeah,
think we have spoken with the NDOS team about being able to kind of use this instead, but I don't know that that's agreed or anything yet.
yeah,
There obviously both forms are going to take a lot of time, and so I can understand where you don't want to have to replicate the work. But if it were done on a computer, you could maybe just copy and paste anyway.
Yeah, that's
And
kind of
then
ongoing. And I guess the other thing to note is that we are doing a bit of an evaluation of this at the moment, of the neurodevelopmental profile, to ensure that it is actually, working in the way that we would hope it is, and to work out what we can do differently, whether that's making changes to the format, or whether that's actually supporting more with how this is rolled out across Highland. This has been around for quite a while. It was originally part of some training that we delivered back in, I think, 2019 to schools. And I'm really keen, once we've done the evaluation, to roll out more training to schools to make sure that school staff are fully aware of this. And obviously, we can include social work and health visitors and things like that in that as well. So I'm hoping that kind of answers people's questions. I don't know if there was any others.
if I can just mention a couple things before I forget them, because they're rolling around in my head. First, if the child is old enough or capable enough, they should also be included in this. So so where I had said, like the slide that I was reading about who should be involved in this, it should be also the young person if they want to be involved in this, because this is their profile. It's not the school's profile. It's not the parent's profile. It's for this child. And that should be the center of they know better than we do about what they're experiencing, and we need to be listening to what they're saying and trying to understand their experience from their point of view, not putting our interpretation on what they're saying. So we need to ask them and listen to them and believe them when they tell us something. So that's also important.
Absolutely. And we can, sorry, I was just thinking, Carrie, that when we run through, so what we're hoping to do next, once we've kind of answered questions, is to run through a kind of a bit of a case study. We've pulled something together. It's a fairly simplified version, just because it's, the nature of what we're doing. But one of the things within that I would want to highlight is, how do we gather the views of the child or young person? Because it might not be appropriate for them to sit through a meeting where we're looking at this in that way, but there are other ways of us ensuring that we've got information from the child to contribute to the profile as well. So
excellent. And the last thing I wanted to know is, just as Laurie said, this is it says Neurodevelopmental Profile Wheel across the top, but it is a very flexible tool. And so this could be an individual doing it for themselves, trying to better understand themselves. Well, because it kind of puts a structure around it, instead of thinking about the whole picture of, I just find the whole day overwhelming. Well, let me just think about this one part. What is it about, like, going into Tesco that is the problem for me? How do I feel in that? So it isn't limited only to the caring circle around a young person sitting in a meeting room and like trying to dissect what that young person's experience is. It is a very flexible tool. And so I would just encourage people to keep their mind open to that if we're having trouble understanding this situation, well, maybe we could just look at this thing for a little bit of it. Maybe this would help, it doesn't have to be So I just wanted to say that.
So there was another question there from Anya around whether the wheel is used in the same way no matter the age and stage of the child. And I guess the short answer would be yes, you can use the profile in the same way, but obviously we have to be mindful of what is, developmentally appropriate. So going back to kind of neurotypical, neuronormative, there are things that we would not expect a 3-year-old to be able to do in terms of communication or their kind of cognitive skills that we might expect from a 9 or 10-year-old. So it's just being mindful of that. Is the concern that we've got because actually what we're seeing is different to what we would expect for their age and stage. So thinking developmentally is really important.
Yeah, and that's also why this is iterative, because as that child develops and grows, the things that we're seeing are likely to change with their experience, with their changing experience of the world. And so this isn't a one and done kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, actually, Carrie, that how children present in terms of what they're finding challenging there could be something that's under the same thing underlying, but actually we see it in one way at one stage and we see it in a totally different way as they get older. So I think it's just always about our ability to be curious about what we're seeing. I think curiosity is the most important part of this, actually, that, you know, like we don't just take the behavior at face value or what we're seeing at face value. We think about what that might mean, and we think about different things it might mean. And we'll kind of come on to that when we do the case study, because I think the other thing to be really aware of is that one behavior could be explained in multiple different ways. And also, you know, just thinking about how all of the different areas of development overlap with each other as well. So if you've got a difficulty with communication, that is going to impact on the social side of things. If you've got, you know, a difficulty with flexibility, that's going to impact on other areas as well. So although we've put them in 6 categories, they definitely all influence each other. And you know, there's always going to be some question marks around what it is that sits underneath the behavior. So be curious would be the key take-home message. So if there are no other questions at this point, if people are happy, we can have a look at an example. And we're going to give you an opportunity to kind of pitch in and have a think about things. I'm really mindful you guys probably have not watched the 6 videos, so you probably don't have that really in-depth knowledge of the 6 areas of development. But hopefully you'll be able to kind of see going through the profile what you think could be going on and have a think about what the connections might be between the presentation and the 6 areas of development. So if I share this one, better get it in the right place so I'm not showing you the answers. Okay. Every time I do this, I lose the people on the screen whilst I'm flicking between. Right, so we have pulled together this example. So we've filled out the whole form, but what we're going to do is just look at the first couple of sections together and start to kind of unpick that together. So just use the chat box to throw any thoughts in if there's anything that you think is relevant. So what I'll do is I'll read through the information that we've got in terms of the background and the presentation, and then we'll look at each of the 6 areas of development. So as you can see, we've got Tom, we've got his date of birth and when his form was completed and who it was completed by. It's usually helpful to put the name and the role. So we've only put the person's name, but you would want to put whether they're a teacher or whether it's a parent or what have you, because if you come to share this information with other people, it's useful for them to know the context of where the information's come from. So in terms of background information, there's not a huge amount here for Tom. He's 8 years old. He lives with his mum and dad and his 5-year-old sister. So we know that there's been a significant change when he was 3 because he's had a sibling arrive, and that his parents are very supportive. So that's we've kind of captured that. He has some speech and language therapy input when he was younger due to some delayed speech. He coped well when he was in nursery and he loved the routine and structure, but he struggled with the transition to primary 1 and has never really coped well with the mainstream classroom. So he currently attends Wandsworth Primary School and he's now in primary 3. So he's had 2 or 3 years to kind of settle into school and he's still finding things quite tricky and he gets very easily overwhelmed. So that's the type of information that we might have. Often we've got more than that, so there might be other bits of assessment information that we've got. There might be significant events, but we've tried to keep it fairly simple for you guys because this is we're not diving in too much depth into this. So in terms of the presentation, the things that have been noted by Rachel are that Tom can speak in short sentences and use basic vocabulary for his age group. He gets really anxious around his peers and struggles to engage in playground activities. He works well with his PSA when she plans things out for him. He struggles with rules. We don't know any more than that. He just struggles with rules. He gets upset if he thinks that he's in trouble both at home and at school. He doesn't like PE and he often has a meltdown as soon as he sees it on the timetable. He only spends short periods of time in the classroom and he has a small side room that he works in with his PSA. He likes things to be quiet and he often tells the other children to shut up. He arrives at school very upset and he doesn't like leaving his mum. And mum says that it can take her hours of repetition to get him out of the door in the morning. I'm sure lots of us are very familiar with that. Tom loves rough and tumble play with his dad, but he doesn't know his own strength and he can be a bit too boisterous when he's playing with his little sister. He's great at maths and he loves computers. He doesn't like reading and he often throws the books at his teacher in PSA, and he also finds story writing a challenge. When Tom gets home after school, he is often very upset and he doesn't know why, but he can become very destructive and he kicks walls and doors and he might break his toys. He loves going on bike rides with his dad. He struggles to sit still and he has occasional toileting accidents. So we've got a little bit of a picture of Tom there. We've got some information to start with. So what we wanted to do was, I'm going to run you through the categories. I'm not going to show you the actual form because I've put in some answers on there. So we want to give you an opportunity to give us your thoughts on what you think might be going on. Can everyone see that one okay, or is it useful for me to zoom in a little bit?
You might want to zoom in a little bit. It's small for me.
Oh, maybe not quite as much as that though. Sorry, everyone. I'll zoom out ever so slightly. The fine art. There we go.
There we go.
Right, so we've got all the information on one page. So in terms of communication, is there anything there that people are seeing that they think might be related to communication? Just stick it in the chat box, or you can pipe up if you prefer.
Speaking in short sentences.
Speaking in short sentences, yeah.
Basic vocabulary.
So those are quite obviously about communication, aren't they? I wonder whether there's anything else there that might be about communication, any of the other struggles that he's got.
The reading and the rules, people are saying.
Yeah, the reading, the rules.
Struggling with his peers.
Yeah. Reading the books. The behaviour in school and especially at home. Yeah.
The way in which he plays.
And behaves. Yeah. So we think all of those things could somehow be connected with communication. So already we've got, a few things that make us think that communication could be a little bit of a challenge for him. And we don't know at this point, do we? Yeah, mum trying to get him out to school, so she's having to repeat herself a lot in order for him to come out of get out of the house. So that could be about the communication and whether he understands what's been asked of him.
Maybe also the working well with the PSA, but not in the classroom setting. So separately.
Yeah.
In that separate room, it says that he does well there.
Yeah. Oh, environment.
Yep, doesn't know, can't explain why he's upset. Good one.
Yeah.
Environment. He likes a quiet environment.
So that maybe helps his communication, actually, doesn't it? It's maybe easier to communicate without all of that noise round about. So we've already got quite a lot of things there. We've got actually toileting accidents. Yep, that's interesting as well. Could be because he can't communicate that. So actually, with a very small amount of information, we've already got lots of things that we think could be connected with communication. So we'll move on to the next area of development, but I think it's really interesting to see, how many of these things could be connected to just that one area of development. Yes, he could be anxious because he doesn't understand what's been asked of him. Yeah, struggling with the rules and lack of comprehension. So those could all be linked with communication. What about social? Is there anything there that we think might be related to how he relates to other people, his understanding of kind of social rules?
Telling the other kids to shut up.
Shut up, yeah. Kind of suggests a kind of a lack of understanding of the how to politely ask someone to be quiet. He enjoys that one-to-one, but not in groups. So he enjoys that social kind of one-to-one. So his ability to interact, being anxious around his peers. Yeah.
Yeah, and the struggling to engage in playground activities, like not understanding what's going on there.
Yeah, thinking he's in trouble, being boisterous with his sister. So not understanding the play with the younger sister. So the nuances
and the PE classes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we think that could be about the social aspect of that as well. Interesting. Is there anything? I mean, I think we kind of need to pick up on the positives as well. You know, is there anything there that suggests there's aspects that are working in terms of his social interactions? And I guess we should have done that for communication as well. You know, what is working?
He likes biking with his
He likes
dad.
biking with dad, and he's great with maths and loves computers. So there's something for us to grab a hold of for that as well, isn't there? He's got that a positive relationship with mum, so he's attached to mum and to his PSA. So there's things there for us to kind of look at, and like I say, in terms of solutions, it's often really, really helpful for us to say, okay, what is it that's working about the relationship with the PSA? What is it she's doing that supports him, that makes that feel more manageable? He likes to know what is expected of him. So yeah, so the routines work. Repetition helps him to understand what the expectations are. Okay, lots of really good stuff there. So the next area of development is cognitive. Someone's jumped in with planning already. They're so transitions are an issue. So that could be about that kind of rigidity and managing change. Anything else that we think links with kind of cognitive? So that's thinking about kind of planning and executing things that he's been asked to do, managing kind of with rigidity, attention. So struggling with rules. What do we think it is about struggling with rules that might hint at a difficulty in terms of the cognitive side of things? Not knowing his own strength. Struggling with reading and writing. Yeah, so maths and computers are very logical. They're very black and white, aren't they? There's no nuance there.
And
yes,
I think
not understanding what's expected of him and why we have rules.
And there's his mom taking hours of repetition to get him out of the door in the morning. So he's probably struggling with organizing himself, or like knowing what the next step is, and getting there, and
possibly
prompting.
Working memory as well for that as well. Like, is he actually able to hold on to the information long enough to go and do the job and get it completed? Yeah, so possible misinterpretation of the rules. And there's something there about rules as well, that actually sometimes we've got different rules for different settings. So the one there was struggling with rules. There could be so many different things going on there in terms of rules, and actually we don't have an awful lot of information about that. But you know, it might be that he over applies a rule, that you know, he sticks to the rules and other people don't, and that can be quite distressing as well. So toileting activities, getting distracted, being engrossed in activities, yeah, could definitely be some of that going on there. Okay, so I think we've got lots of things there in terms of cognitive. What about his sensory needs? Is there anything that we're seeing there that might hint that he's struggling, or he processes sensory information in a different way to a neurotypical person? Struggling to sit still, PE being too busy, like in the quiet. Not knowing his own strengths. Yeah, that's great. Separation from class.
Also the toileting thing, that's internal. He might not be picking up on the internal sense.
Yeah, so we've kind of picked up on the sound there. The PE, I mean, PE is, there's so many sensory experiences involved with going to PE. The smell of the gym hall, and the, you know, the hall echoing, balls flying about all over the place. All of these things can be quite tricky. So the destructive behaviours as well, that's a really interesting one. So is he getting something? Is there a sensory something involved in that? Changing clothes for PE, that's a really good one actually. And that, I guess that could link in with the organisation and the cognitive as well, actually. That's a big ask for some of our youngsters, taking hours to get out of the house. Yes, it could be the whole experience of school as a sensory overwhelm. Yeah, so and we don't know the answers to some of these questions. You know, I think, you know, for that one, that's something that we might want to explore, isn't it? How is he actually experiencing things? So if the PE teacher is not prefixing with the child's name, so he doesn't understand the rules for him or what's expected of him. Yeah, so lots going on. In such a simple example, you can see why it's, you know, this can be a lengthy process when we're thinking about, you know, a more in-depth situation than what we're dealing with just now. So what about motor? This is the one that I always find really funny, because every time I do a neurodevelopmental profile, motor is the one that's hardly got anything, because we have so much information for everything else, but motor seems to to not come up quite as much. So anything there that you think relates to motor skills, so his big motor skills, but also his kind of fine motor skills, things that he's struggling with. So the biking, so the fact that he can do biking is, there's a lot of coordination involved there, the rough and tumble play,
Finding it hard with the writing. Yep.
The coordination for PE might have an impact. Using a computer, that's a really good one, because actually there's a lot of, and playing computer games and things, I always think that's amazing. Like, I have not got the coordination to be able to do that. So he appears to have good strength because he's able to, I'm assuming that's based on the fact that he's his destructive behaviour, rough and tumble, motor skills. Okie dokie. So actually quite a few things there that we think might be kind of drawing on those kind of those motor skills. And then the final one is around his emotional development. So where do we think he is in terms of his emotional development? What would be our concerns? Is there anything that stands out for you in terms of the information that's there? Anxiety with peers. Yeah, so he's anxious. And I'd be curious to know what that looks like, because there's not really any information there about how he shows us he's anxious. Yeah, so he has those meltdowns once he's home. And we see that a lot, don't we? That they can hold it together when they're in school, and then they're in that safe space and it all comes flooding out.
And also, I think telling the children to shut up, like, that is showing that he's becoming dysregulated. And
and also when we become really overwhelmed, our tolerance for other things is reduced. So actually he's showing us that he's overwhelmed by, so actually, I think a couple of people have said there, his ability to actually express how he's feeling. So he's expressing that through behaviour, you know, the destructive behaviour, telling people to shut up. And actually, even that's kind of struggling to sit still. If we're feeling a bit anxious, actually, it's really difficult to sit still because we're kind of in fight or flight mode as well. Getting upset if he thinks he's in trouble as well.
And so he's thinking he's in trouble and not knowing he's in trouble. Like, that the emotional understanding of what's going on in the room, like he's just not reading that right, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that struggling to leave mum in the morning, that's upsetting for him as well. And it's always difficult to know, is that about him struggling to be away from mum? Is it about actually he's going into an environment that's too overwhelming for him? Is it a bit of a combination of both? Mum presumably is a bit of a safe space, who probably reads him really well and gives him that sense of safety and security. So as you can probably see, we've got a lot of information there. What's hearing there?
Whoever's just joined, if you can just put your microphone on mute.
Yeah, so he might be attempting to regulate himself by kicking, and so that's always really interesting actually to look at what they're doing that is actually their best attempt to regulate themselves. Do we you know, can we give them something that's similar in terms of which, you know, sensory systems it's accessing, that isn't as destructive, that kind of gives them that same feedback but in a more safe way for everybody. Please, does anxiety lie specifically in one of the, I don't know what that is referring back to.
Specifically in one of the areas that she asked that question earlier on. Does anxiety lie specifically in one of the areas? And I think emotional, probably yes, but also I think the anxiety can just be a byproduct of overwhelming the other areas. So it's not necessarily about emotional regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, I think that's a really good point. I think that when we're talking about that kind of emotional side of things, I think if you look at the form, actually, a lot of the questions within that section are actually thinking about how do some of the other areas of development impact them so that they are becoming emotionally overwhelmed by things. So, so it all kind of, we're just building a picture at the moment, aren't we? So in terms of, you guys have probably mentioned things that I haven't even noted down, but I made an attempt to kind of pull together the profile. So in terms of communication, I've put down some of the things that we've spoken about. So sentences, the vocabulary, is he understanding the rules? I noted about PE on the timetable, so he obviously can understand the timetable, so that might be something that's important for us. So obviously he doesn't like PE, but he is able to understand that that's coming later in the day. He's not spending time in classes. That about his understanding of instructions, working individually. Is it easier to do that one-to-one and then that repetition of the instructions? We've got all of the social things that we spoke about, so that anxiety with his peers, struggling with the playground, the fact that he works well with the PSA and has that good attachment with mum. He has those short periods in the classroom. So one of my questions was, does he have opportunities for social interaction in an environment that actually suits him? His understanding of social rules, so telling people to shut up is maybe not an appropriate way of doing that. Upset if he thinks he's in trouble. So is he actually reading the situation right? Is he understanding the social rules properly? And then thinking about the rough and tumble play, often when children are really struggling with communication or social interaction, rough and tumble physical play is far less pressure. There's less communication demand, there's less social demand. That can just be a go-to for some of our children who are struggling. So I thought that was worth noting as well. And then all the things that you've kind of covered. So there's stuff there around him liking that predictability, the structure and the routine, when things are planned out, the maths and the computers, it's all quite predictable. He struggles a bit more when there's less structure, so the playground, and when he's in PE, that's maybe a bit less predictable with things kind of flying around all over the place. Struggling with rules and that anxiety. Is he really rigid about rules, and is he kind of over applying the rules? So, he takes the rule from the playground and thinks it applies in the classroom as well, or vice versa. He struggles with transitions potentially, so we know that home to school is tricky for him, so I'd like to find out more about what's happening in school. Appropriate play for different situations. I think someone did say that, thinking about knowing that rough and tumble is okay when you're with dad, but actually it's too much for sister. So actually, can he make those adaptations to his behaviour to suit the situation? That's another sort of thing around mental flexibility. And then obviously his challenges with reading and writing are a bit of a concern. So there's so many things that could be about. And obviously it could be about all of these other things that we've spoken about, but we need to explore that a little bit more. So is that about sort of phonological awareness and the kind of the phonics side of things, or is it to do with working memory, his comprehension, structuring stories, the imaginative aspect of having to do story writing? So lots of things there. I've captured, I think, all of the things we spoke about in terms of sensory. So PE, there's lots of sensory elements within that. We know that he's not great with lots of busyness and lots of noise, because he's telling us that loud and clear. We spoke about the proprioception, so that rough and tumble play and not knowing how much force to use, that's all connected with like having that sense of your body. And also his inability to kind of sit still could be because he's seeking sensory feedback. And then whether he knows that he needs to go to the toilet. Motor was very sparse when I went through it. We mentioned a few things. So obviously he enjoys the bike rides, which is good. That suggests that he does have some motor skills and he can coordinate things. But I wondered about PE, and do we need to think about that? That's something just for us to think about. And then emotional, I think we've kind of captured all of those things as well. So the anxiety around his peers, how do we know that? What does that look like? He gets upset if he's in trouble or when he's leaving mum, and when he's arriving home from school, he's quite upset. I wondered whether the rules give him a sense of, the thing about rules, he might be trying to create a sense of control and predictability by being quite rigid about things. So it might seem like he's not following the rules, but actually he's just trying to
he's following his rules.
He's making his own rules and following his own rules, because maybe ours are a bit too woolly and wishy-washy and not consistent. And then thinking about how he shows his emotions. So at the moment, he's showing his emotions through throwing things and shouting at the other children and being destructive. And then I wondered about the bike rides and whether those might be calming for him, because we don't really have any information about what helps him to calm down. So that's also really, really important. So based on the information from the profile, I've kind of put some things into the plan section just to give a bit of a sense of where you might go with that. I think it's really helpful to not try and do too much when you're doing the planning. We sometimes go through the profile and there's so many different things that we could target, but it's maybe just being a bit focused about what we do first. If we only do a couple of things at a time, then we can actually see whether those are having an impact. If you do 7 or 8 different things all at the same time, it's sometimes difficult to know what's been successful. So we might want to just kind of rein it in a little bit sometimes when we're coming up with a plan. So having looked at the information that was there, I thought that maybe there were already some things in place. So he works in his quiet space with the PSA, which seems to work quite well. I thought there was maybe a visual timetable in place because it said when he sees PE on the timetable, he gets upset. So it sounds like that's probably there. And I would speculate that the instructions are differentiated. So the PSA maybe repeats the instructions and uses minimal language and simple vocabulary already. There are probably other things that would be in place, but I've had to make this up. So I've put in a few simple things. So in terms of if you were a parent completing this and trying to come up with some ideas, what I've put on there is maybe if the visuals work in school, could we use a visual timetable in the morning so that we're not having to keep repeating ourselves? So he can see what the routine is. He doesn't have to hold that information, and that might help with that morning routine and with that transition to school, so he knows exactly what to expect. And then I thought about other activities that engage his proprioceptive system. So he likes the rough and tumble and he likes the bike. Are there other things that we could introduce into his, either after school or before he goes to school that help to kind of give him that sense of calm? In terms of what others could do, I thought school might want to think about doing some assessment around his literacy developments because it doesn't sound like that's been explored. They could probably be doing the proprioceptive activities as well, so those calming activities at points within the day. But I also wondered about opportunities for structured play or games with peers in a space that he feels comfortable with and supported by an adult to help him to develop those social skills and have positive interactions with his peers. And I've put on there using something like a talking mat so that we can actually explore Tom's experiences of school. So I don't know if people are familiar with the talking mat, but it's a visual way of trying to find out what's going on for a child and get their views about things. So we use kind of, a smiley face, a sad face, and a neutral face, and then we take different aspects of the school day in visual form, and they can organise them to say which ones they feel comfortable with, which ones not so comfortable with. And it can be a really useful way of kind of getting a sense of what's actually going on for them. In terms of who could support you for this example, I thought that the ASL teacher or the speech and language therapist might be able to help with visuals for doing the visual timetable for home. And in terms of the proprioceptive activities, you might want to phone the Just Ask helpline or see if if there was an OT involved anyway, to get some ideas of the types of activities that might be helpful. So that is, I was going to say, a really simple, straightforward example of a profile, but actually you can see, even with fairly minimal information, we've already got lots of questions and things that we might want to explore in terms of Tom's development, and a few things to go away and try, and then we might want to come back and look at the profile again once we've put those things in place to see what's been successful. So has anyone got any questions at this point, or comments? Feedback?
I think, and I just want to note what I would hope that everybody takes away from that is that obviously we've walked away with a lot more questions than we have potential solutions, and that's okay. Like, that's actually the point, because we can look at a situation and say, well, this young person is just clearly out of control. They're not okay. We don't know what's going on. And this is to help us to first find what questions we need to ask before we can get the answers to those questions. We're not just going to find one magic thing that's going to fix it all. We're not going to put ear defenders on him and suddenly everything is going to be okay in class. Like we need to actually try to understand what it is that he's going through. And so it's absolutely the goal to come away with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I suppose that's when you look at that profile actually, and you think about all of the things that could be impacting on a child, particularly in the school environment, it's no wonder some of our children are so overwhelmed. When you think about those areas of development, the sensory stuff's really overwhelming. We've got such high expectations in terms of their communication and the social side of things that actually, if their skills are not there for whatever reason, that can be a really overwhelming environment. So I guess it's the
frequent changing during the day of one topic to another, that's such a huge pressure.
Yeah. So hopefully that has been helpful for people. Have you got another slide, Carrie? I think there was a Was it a
It was
closing slide?
it was just a closing slide.
Just the usual. Yeah, and if there's anything people want more information on or anything, so Carrie is going to do. Sorry, so there's a question there about the talking mats. I think there is information about talking mats on the Pines website. I don't know if anyone can get their hands on that very quickly and ping it into the chat box.
I don't know what's going on now.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah has just added the survey to the chat bar, so it would be really helpful for us to get some feedback on the session to find out what's been helpful for you from the session, and if there's anything that we could have done differently to make it more accessible, or information that you feel we didn't give you that would have been helpful. We're always open to feedback.
Yeah. And yes, you can either email us at Thriving Families at that general email address, and if that QR code isn't working, somebody said that the QR code isn't working. I worked so hard to create that QR code, the one that's earlier in the presentation. So now I have to fix that before it gets sent out so that everybody has the right information. But you can also email me directly about the upcoming deep dive sessions that we're going to be doing. So we'll be putting it out in the email, that the follow-up email to this, what the dates are going to be and what sessions are going to be on those dates. But I'm going to be going into each of the areas of neurodevelopment in a little bit more detail, so that if you're mostly interested in understanding more about motor skills, you don't have to sit through all the rest of them, is the idea. But then also to just take general questions about using the wheel itself, if you're getting practice with it and saying, well, this didn't quite go this way. I do think it's the kind of tool that you need to be using before you really know what your questions are about it.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of comments in the chat there, Carrie. Someone has made the point that Tom's voice was not there at this stage, and I think that that's a really really valid point. Obviously, we were just kind of pulling something together for the purposes of this, and that might be one of your outcomes. And obviously, we've put that as part of the plan. Do a talking mat, do something to get the child's voice, because actually we don't know what's going on for them. And someone's asked a question about the wait time for NDAS, and I'm going to just, although we are doing stuff around neurodevelopmental, we are not part of the neurodevelopmental assessment service. So I can't answer that question right now. I know that there has been communication sent out to anyone that is on the waiting list, and I think they're just getting their ducks in a row at the moment. So sorry, I can't help you with that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but hopefully this tool is going to help create positive change in the moment while you're waiting for that, because it doesn't change the assessment process to have gone through this. It's hopefully just going to be more evidence that you can say, we did the profile wheel, we tried these things based on the outcomes of it, and we saw this impact, right? And so that you're just providing that extra information when you do get to the assessment.
Yeah, because I think that's, when you put the referral form into NDAS, by the time you get to the top of the waiting list, things are likely to have changed quite a lot in that time. Yeah. So actually being able to have an up-to-date profile when they do get to the top of the list, I will sometimes, if we've done one, just, send it off to them so they can add it to the information that they've already got as well. So, sorry there, I always really struggle when I've got the chat thing coming on and I'm talking at the same time, and I do not have to, there might be a little bit of neurodivergence here in terms of me being able to focus my attention. So what have we got? Someone asked a question. One document like the wheel would be useful. One document to rule them all. I love it. Okay. I'm not going to read out the rest of John's message because people can read that for themselves. Yeah, we are obviously there is overlap between the services. I think Sarah has highlighted that further down, that actually we are in discussions with the NDAS program board, so we are trying to be part of making things more efficient and having discussions with them.
to streamline and to make it easier for everybody all around, because there's a lot of everybody who's already completed the NDAS forms knows that that is not a user-friendly experience, and it takes a lot of time, and there is a very valid reason that there is pushback on wanting to have to do more of those than is necessary, or doing it when the outcome that you're actually looking for is to try to improve the current experience. Completing an NDAS form does not help that.
No.
Because that is just getting sent away somewhere. And so if what we're looking for is change in the moment, spending all that time to do the NDAS form isn't going to help get there.
Yeah.
But that's why the profile wheel, that's why it was created, was so that we can say, how can we actually understand these things right now, what it looks like right now, so that we can try to help it. And they should be working in partnership. These things should be working in partnership. But yes, there are changes that need to happen.
Okay.
And Lauren, to your question about how you contact the NDAS team, there is an email address, which I should know off by heart, but I don't.
I think it's on the Pines website, isn't it? And I think they've got.
There you go. Sarah's put it in. Well done.
Perfect.
I was also thinking, Sarah, do you have the Just Ask information to hand to put in? I was trying to copy and paste it out of my presentation, but that's not going very easily while I'm trying to talk at the same time.
Yeah. So people might not know about Just Ask. So because I was quite surprised to hear recently that people did not know about Just Ask, because I feel like it's out there. But so Just Ask is an inquiry line. So the information's just popped up on the screen. So it operates between 1 and 4 on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and it gives you the ability to access a range of different professionals. So there's speech and language, OTs, educational psychology. We've also got our home visiting teachers from our service who work with the younger ones. I can't think who else is on there. Physios.
It's listed on the Highland Council website.
Yeah, and primary mental health workers as well. So if you've got just like a general query that you could potentially just get a little bit of, signposting to resources or what have you, it can be a really useful way of kind of getting that. Or if you're thinking that you might want to be putting in a referral in for a service, sometimes like having a quick chat with them through Just Ask can give you the answer as to whether it's worth actually doing that or whether there's another route to go. So it's a good resource to make use of.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Oh, sorry, that's a really nice comment from John saying that, well, we'll gloss over the first bit of it, but he's saying it's really important to utilise these resources for parents because NDAS is no good, but that we are brilliant, and without.
Oh, thank you.
And that parents would crumble without these resources. So I think that's really nice. I feel like I would like to screenshot that, but we might need to cut bits of that off. So
Positive.
Put that on the website without us.
Without us. John, I'm going to ask you to complete the survey.
Yes, survey. Indeed. And actually, yeah, so I'm just thinking that the evaluation for the neurodevelopmental profile has been out and had a closing date, but I might actually put it out again. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because I think we could do with getting a bit more feedback on it. So once you guys have had a chance to actually try the profile, do the evaluation form for me and let me know how that goes for you and whether that's useful or not.
And I just want to note as an aside, my other big project of late has been updating the Thriving Families website, and we've launched the new website. There's still parts of it under construction, so be kind, but we have put lots of information there to try to make sure that parents have access to the resources that they need, or just to the information that they can even just get started with something. So if you go to thrivingfamilies.org.uk, you can check out what we've tried to create there, and our taking feedback on that also. There's no official survey form or anything, but you can send us an email or anything if you think that there's something missing. We're trying to make it as complete a service as possible, like trying to make sure that the information is as available as possible, because we do know how much, a lot of this stuff happens at like 2:00 in the morning where you're just feeling completely overwhelmed and you're like, I just need something to change to make it better. That's what we're trying to help provide, because you're not always available on a Thursday to call Just Ask. But we want to try to make it, we want you to feel like you've got the information that you need when you need it. So let us know if there's anything we can do there. It's going to go out, Heather, your question on who do you contact. It's going to go out in the email that follows up this session. Will be all the contact information and the dates and everything. It's going to be coming directly to me, but
I'm just wondering whether Heather might be from a school or something and thinking about maybe Heather can confirm that.
Oh, okay. Do you mean the, like, having a school counseling?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess you can access Carrie's sessions in the meantime, and there will be, I think there will be more, there'll be more training, I think, for schools and professionals coming up, because I'm really keen that we get the schools really on board with this. Again, because we have done things with them in the past, but I think it's always worth reviewing and refreshing. So, and we would include other services, and that's the school counselling could be included.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that this wheel is usable, or it's useful to everybody in some capacity. And so it's just kind of knowing about it, really, and staying positive and open to the information that you're hearing while you're doing it.